Eforms are a great way to make customized entry screens for data collection, data presentation. Most people know you can pop up a form and ask some questions, get some data input, things like that. What we've been working on, though, over the last few months is the ability to use them for a lot more, for dashboards, for portals, things like that. So you can use it to authenticate people into the system and transfer data that way. So what we're going to show you is we're going to start out with a list of the new fields we've put in, and I'll describe each one. We'll talk about it. I'll throw a couple on the form. I'll mess with them a little bit so you can see what they do. And then probably that's by 15, 20 minutes maybe. The rest of the time, we're going to actually use them to build actual examples, such as a public portal that allows for searching and viewing of documents, vendor portal that allows you to authenticate a vendor in to look at their invoices. Could just as easily be used for customers, for parents in a school situation, things like that. So we're going to take the tools that I show you, and we're going to build something at the end. Before I show you the fields themselves, though, I just wanted to point out one new feature. If you go into the eForm list, next to the new button, there's a drop down on the left. If you click that, you can actually design a quick eForm based on the record types. So this is a list of the record types in the system. If I wanted to create a PO eForm, I could just simply click PO, and it'll take all the fields in the PO record type and just throw them on a form for you. Okay, so it's just a great way to get started very quickly. Okay. So I just wanted to point that out. Okay, so let's talk about some fields. I'm going to pop in, make a new form. All right, the fields are broken down into container fields, button and action fields, data and viewer fields, and then some miscellaneous ones. And so I'm going to walk through them and show you, and I'll start in that order probably. So container fields, you probably are used to the flexible columns where you could put this up here and say, I want a 6x6 column width. So then you start throwing fields in there. All right, you can just keep adding them. They'll keep stacking up left to right because it's 6x6. You have a column here and a column here. And as you add them, they just add to the end there. And then, of course, you could change the layout 444. So it's not a bad tool, but that's been there for a while. Same with the panel. Panel allows you to put fields inside of it, and it gives you a nice little frame around it. You've got a panel header that you can change. You can change the colors, all that kind of thing. Okay. But some of the newer ones, a tab container, for instance. With the tab container, you can actually make multiple tabs in one field, and each one of those tabs has its own list of fields inside of it. So let's say I have a tab for entering a date and a time, and I could go back to this tab container, add another tab. Maybe I'll call that date time, and this will be name info. So on the second tab, then I could put in my name, address, city, state, zip, those types of fields. And notice that when I click from tab to tab, it shows the proper fields. So just another UI tool that allows you to break down your fields into a more easily digestible format, if you will. Okay. Then there's an iframe field that we've added. The iframe field is interesting because it actually is not built to hold fields. It's built to hold a web page. So for instance, I could put over here on the iframe source URL, I could say https://docmanagement.com. Now this is not going to work. I'll show you here. Oh, got to give it a name. Test. Okay. It'll actually try to show the doc management website inside there, but because of security, it's saying can't do it. So what you have to make sure is if you're going to use this iframe to load somebody else's web page, that they are allowing you to, and it's basically a setting on their side where they can say yes, allow beta.docmanagement.com to show my site. So when I'm showing this to people, what I typically will do is just go ahead and use the beta site, which will look interesting. So now when I load my form, it's going to load another version of the website inside of this little form here. Now, of course, I can adjust the sizes, make it, width, height, all that stuff. So if you are trying to work with some other tool, somebody else's web pages, if you will, you could actually embed those into your forms, make them part of your UI. Once again, they have to give you permission to do so. Then once they've done that, then you can use their UI in here. And it works great for integrations, things like that. So let's say you're building an integration to an accounting system. You might actually have a view to that accounting system that you can put right into your form. Okay, that's the iframe field. And if you're wondering why it's called that, because it's iframe is a technology that HTML uses, the web browsers, and iframe is basically a browser inside of a browser. So that's what the iframe field does. And of course, you can you can do these together. You could put an iframe inside of a panel, all sorts of things. Now the modal window gets very interesting. In fact, I'll throw it on here and we'll talk about it in a second. What this does is create a pop-up window. I'll go ahead and do it now. This takes a little bit more work to do because you have to tell it when to pop up. But let me just throw a couple fields in here. Okay. And then I will gonna kind of segue into our next section, which is the button fields. Open. Okay. And I will tell the modal window to open. I have an open button, but I don't see any of those fields there. When I click the button, though, my modal window pops up. So this is great, and I'll show you an example of this in a little bit. You can do a pop-up search screen. You can pop up document viewers to be able to view documents in a pop-up window. And we have another example where we actually use it for adding new vendors. So let's say you have an autocomplete field here with vendors on it. You do a search, you don't find your vendor. You click the add button, and you put the new vendor in. That can add the vendor record. And when you close it, it'll actually put the vendor information right in there for you. So there's ways to do little lookups and adds and things like that with little pop-up windows. And I'll show you an example of that if we have time at the end. And then there's a new interesting one here called the split columns. Now, split columns is a two-way split. But what's interesting about it is you can resize it manually and get just the right size, and then you can start dropping fields. Now, these are two completely independent frames, whereas with the flex columns, as you kept adding, it would go from left to right to left to right and keep adding and kind of stacked. This one actually gives you two independent columns that you can put things into, and they don't interfere with each other. Right? And then they're sizable, of course. It's about where I want right there. Now, of course, the end users don't get the sizers. They just see the columns. So that's a nice addition. And this works wonderfully for things like having a logo on the left and a title on the right. Just makes it really simple to size the columns just right to fit the logo. Whereas the other one was kind of tricky. And let me just save this and show you. I'll pop up in the test here. One thing to keep in mind also is the containers have what we call a column spacing between them. By default, they smash right up against each other because there are times when you might want them right next to each other. But you can take this column spacing over here. Notice how I'm making more space between the columns. And this happens also with the flex column control as well. So I just want to point that out. And that gives you a little bit of breathing room between the left and the right. Okay, so those are our containers. Like I said, the flexible column panel and table were there before. What we've added was the tabs, the iframe, the modal, and the split. The modal is probably the most functional, but it takes a little more work to make it go. But I'm definitely going to show you an example of that. All right, let's move on. Button/action fields. Now, we always had eForm buttons. And what the eForm buttons will do, this one is just a placeholder that mimics what the actual form buttons on the form are. So if I go to my form buttons and I say I want to put a cancel in there, and I'll do a print button too. Notice that when I'm doing it, it's adding it not only at the bottom of the form, but also in this eForm buttons control. So you have a field where you can take this, I can put it at the top, I can put it in the middle, so you can place your buttons anywhere you want. That one's been there, but I just like to point it out because it's something a lot of people don't think about. Even if I have it at the top and the bottom by default, I can still throw this one anywhere I want to. Let me clean this up a little bit. So that one's there, and it's just the same buttons as before. But now we have button field. Now this one's been there before as well. By default, though, all it could do was eForm actions. Okay, so you can tell it to save or cancel or reset or print, basically the same thing the form can do. But we've added a bunch to it. Now you can have it do things such as setting a field value. There we go, setting a field value. So let's just say I have I'll just go pick a text field here, and I'll name it text box 1. Okay, I click this button, I'm going to say set text box 1 to Brad was here. Okay. Let's test that. Hit the button, and there you go. So you can have a button click now, do something, update a value. You can have it select the drop-down in an option list. You can have it select the right radio button, checkbox on and off. Anything that has a value you can set, even hidden values if you wanted to. But this button now can do things like setting values. I like that. You can have it open a web link. You just got to tell it where to go to. Okay, I'm going to say go to DocMgt.com. So now if I refresh, instead of setting Brad was here, it'll actually pop a new window. Okay? Coming back to the whole dashboard concept, not only do you want to display things to people, you want to give them the ability to do things. So that's where the button control comes in. It's doing simple things, popping windows, copying to clipboard. You could have it copy this text to the clipboard, which is just the Windows clipboard, so they could paste it somewhere else. In fact, we used that for one of our customers. They needed to be able to, they had 4 or 5 fields on the screen that all concatenated to one big long GL code. Right? It's a GL code lookup is what it was. And when it got all done, they wanted a button where they could just copy it into their browser so they could paste it into their other system. It saved them a ton of work. So simple things. You can run an action set. Now, if you're not familiar with action sets, I'm not going to go through that today, but in our next session we will. An action set is a list of actions that are run on the server. So it's basically a call back to the server to do some actions. And I could say, okay, I want to run this action set, their barcode test. And I'll say send back, and I can tell it which fields to send back. So text box 1, take the value of that field and send it. And it'll actually send back to the server, text box 1 equals whatever's in it. So then the server then can take that information and run actions using those values, and it'll send results back. Now, the fun part about it is in the action sets, and even in workflow, you can do this in add-ins, there's a set return data action type. So once you're done, let's say you want to do put a PO number in here. So let's say we take purchase orders here. Okay. Let's say I want to enter a PO number and I want to return the amount from that PO number. I could actually type in the PO number here and have this button click run an action set that does a search and update, searches for PO number 1, 2, 3, 4, returns the value back, the amount. What happens is when it comes back, the button click will actually look at the data coming back and say, okay, I have values called amount. Is there a field named amount? There is. Oh, then put my value there. Okay, so you can return values based on the field name of the form and say, well, if you have a field with this name on it, put this value in there. So you can do lookups dynamically, which is a lot of fun. And there's other things you can do with that. Of course, you can send emails. Anything you can do in workflow or automation, you can do with an action set. You can have it trigger an internal search. So I could say, for instance, all these save searches up here, right? Say this one. That's search ID 77. If I wanted to, I could say run search ID 77 with that button click, and it'll actually run that search for me. So now you can make buttons, links, things like that that will activate a search that you already have saved for that user. So once again, building on that dashboard mentality, you can give them links to pop open to see what they want to see. Trigger a search field. Now, we haven't gotten to them yet, but we actually have fields in here that allow you to put in search results in the actual forms, both public or secured forms, search results. So you can actually trigger that search with a button. And then, of course, you can have trigger actions. Now, there's certain types of fields that do actions. You can trigger those actions with this. And if there were any other than me, I think it does. Let me look. I think it does buttons. Yeah. So I could have this button click trigger that button if I wanted to. Just say, hey, when I'm clicked, click that button for me. And then whatever this one will do it for you. So this comes into play not so much for button to button, but there's actually another field type called multi-action that we're going to talk about. Now that's really powerful. You can have one click do multiple things. Once again, a button field, you can set values, perform eForm actions, print, save, cancel, etc. Open web links, copy clip to clipboard, run action sets, run searches, trigger a search field or trigger a field action. So those are the things you can do with it. Now to extend that, we have what we call button bars and toolbars. Now a button bar is kind of what it sounds like. You're going to build a series of buttons that's going to make a bar. And I could display those as tabs, which is what they are now, or as actual buttons. So you can give a little bit of an appearance difference. Now, the thing about this is this will auto size, and when it gets too big, it'll wrap for you automatically. It also will auto size based on the screen size. So as I resize the form, that'll wrap differently too. So you got to keep that in mind. If you're going to use this field type, you don't really have total control over how it looks or how it wraps. But it's a great way to give them, 5 or 6 options to people. Now, what's an option? It's basically the exact same thing as a button, but just in a series. Okay, so each one of these up here represents a button click, if you will. You click on the edit, And there's the same options I had in the button. Okay, so now I could have one button that sets a field to A, this one sets it to B, this one sets it to C, this one sets it to D. Why is that important? Well, later on, you can use those values to hide and show other fields. So let's say you wanted to put a little thing here. I'll do a couple flex columns, one here, and I want to say option. Actually, no, I don't put it there. Let me put it here. Display. Okay, so the option A. This one will do option B. All right. Now I'll take these four options, get rid of them all. So this is option A, this is option B. And what I'll do here is, oh, I got to put something in here first. I'll use a hidden field. Okay. I might want to put that in the container. There we go. All right. So in this hidden field, I'm going to call it option, selected option. Okay. And I'm going to say in option A, I'm going to set selected option to A. And for option B, I'm going to set selected option to B. Okay. So far, all we're doing is setting a field value. But then, if you go to these columns, for this one, I can use my required enable visible when, set this visible when selected option equals A. Equals, not exists, A. And this one, I'll say, make it visible when selected option equals B. So we're building a little menu system, and all it's doing right now is just hiding and showing different headers. Option A, option B. That also comes into play where you may have maybe option A is to do a search, give them a list of search options they can click around. They have a whole bunch of features inside this set of this panel, if you will, this container where it just is all focused on searching. And then maybe this option is going to show another form or another container that shows them maybe an e-form to fill out for requests for information or parts requests, things like that, depending on what you're looking at. Okay. So button click. So what we're going to do now is we're just building on what all these little pieces do. Button click sets a value there. This one watches that value, and when it equals A, it shows. When it equals B, this one shows. All right, and of course, there's a lot of other things with your button bar that we can do just like the button click, but I'm not going to go through all of them. It's the same basic principle. You can have a button that launches a search, another one that takes them to a help page. And a lot of times what these will do, you could actually use it to open a web link that goes to another eForm. So maybe this eForm is 143, right? So maybe you could say, go to 144, open in a new window. So this button can open a whole nother eForm to do something else. So toolbar field, very, very similar to the button bar, except you're really building not just a series of buttons, it's kind of a menu option. It looks a little bit cleaner in my opinion. Well, let's do the same thing using a toolbar so you can see the difference. Okay. Probably could have just copied the field and changed it. There you go. A. And this one sets selected option to B. Okay. Save. Okay. So this one goes A. I can use this to go to A or B, or this to go to A or B. Doesn't matter. They work the same way. But this more is a menu look, because the thing you can do with it that's really slick is there's an extra option tucked away in here that's not in the other ones. Drop-down menu. Now I can have a drop-down menu that does this. Set, hold on a second, let me turn off my autocomplete stuff. All right, set option to A, set option to B. I'm going to just get rid of these two, just to show you the difference. Now I have this little drop down over here. Notice I put my name in it because my autocomplete. That's why it drove me crazy. There. A little bit normal. Okay. You can also do things with the toolbar, such as have a brand. You can have a brand, something like this that shows up on the left. And I could change my colors, which I should do. You can barely see it. Or you can have it actually be, I think I have a link here. There, you can do a logo. So now let's get rid of all this on the top Now you're getting into more of the branded menus across the top. But you also, if you'll notice, have options down here too. Okay. Now these are right-handed options. These are left-hand. So left hand and right hand. Notice the other up here. Do the same things with those. So that's why, in my opinion, if you're actually building kind of a menued system, this would be the way to go. Gives you a lot more flexibility than just having buttons. And it gives you a lot more places to put features as well. All right, so great question came up. Thank you for that, Brock. Let's just say you wanted to do 3 or 4 things. Let's just say we wanted to, okay, not only set the selected options so the right panel comes up, but I also want to change. Let's do this. Let's actually make, inside of this flex column, I'm going to say selected name. Okay, I can do that right there. We go. And I'll call it name 1. So when they click, I'm going to get rid of this toolbar. We'll just use this up here. When I click this one, I want to do a couple things. I want to set it to option A to show this, but I also want to put something in this field. Okay, so you can't really do that with a single click because you can only do one action. Okay, I can only set the field value. Let me do this real quick. I think I can turn it off here. Here we go. If I want to do multiple things, though, I have the option to use the multi-action. So let me just put that up there. Now this one, I'm going to say, okay, option A. I'm just going to I like to give it a name so I know what it is. But name. This one, I'm going to do a couple things. First, I'm going to set the field value of selected option to A and set a name. I set that name 1 to add. Okay. Now, instead of up in here, instead of having option A just set that one field, I'm just going to have that trigger the multi-action. So go back into your menu system. Option A, instead of triggering just this one thing, I got a couple options. I could just tell the multi-action field to do something by just by giving it any value. If you set the multi-action value to a field to a value, it'll trigger it, no matter what value you tell it to use. It'll also be able to carry that value forward into the actions, which you can use later. But for now, I'm just going to say run, just so it does something. So now when I click option A from my drop-down menu, it should do both. It should set that name and pop open that panel. There you go. So I could make multiples of these drop downs just to prove my point. Each one of them I'll do. That one's wrong. Got to do this here, the multi-action. So I could do 5 different things. I could do all of that plus open up a URL. Make sure to do it in a new window here. So back here, we got Brad Vosser, we showed the panel, and we opened our window. So the multi-action is really going to be a lot of what glues everything together. If you can use it, if you can put a system together without them, that's fine. But my guess is you're going to want to do 2 or 3 things. Like for instance, when you pop up a modal window and you want to show an eForm, then let's just say you don't know which eForm ahead of time. They're going to select something in the form beforehand. You can actually do that now, where you can actually say, okay, I have an eForm control embedded in a pop-up. I need to tell the eForm which form to load. I need to tell the pop-up to open, and I need to do something else. Well, that's where the multi-actions come in. You can program them to do as many things as you need. So these are all action-centered. Now, of course, the eForm buttons really just does what the eForm button clicks on the bottom do. No big special thing there. But everything past that has the ability to do a little bit of everything, as you've seen. So, and we'll keep enhancing these. We'll probably be adding new options here. So those are probably the most complicated piece. Let's talk about our data/viewer fields. The search results. So this is an internal search that you tell it what search to run. You can either say search by search ID. And remember those IDs I have in my dropdown and my save search, they actually are also shown here. So I can say, okay, deeply invoices charted and grouped, or just, let's see, yeah, let's do that one. Okay. All right, save. I think if I remember right, I have to tell it to run when it opens. Okay, so I'm going to tell it to run the search as soon as the form opens. And it's just going to run that save search that I had done. Now I would probably change my form properties in this case to be a little wider. So I'm going to go to my display options. I'll just tell it to take off the minimum and maximum. I'll give it a little bit of padding on the left and the right. That'll look a little bit nicer. There you go. Okay. Nothing happens when I click it yet, but I can make a change to that too. So now if we go back to that search form, there's actually a click to open option. I can click to open in the same window, which just basically makes this screen navigate just like the search results do, or to tell it to pop open in a new window, or to show the preview panel, which I kind of like for portals. So now if I go back and I reload that form, click the button, it actually pops up the record preview screen. And if I want to, then I can go ahead and say go to record, that'll take me there. So this might be a good option for somebody who's just keeping track of things, wants to look at things, but doesn't really necessarily need to leave the report. Just tell them hit close. And if you want to, you can even get rid of that go to record button too, so they can't go to record. They can just do a preview. And depending on your target audience, that might be the best option. So there's your options there. Now, advanced settings, like I said, you can tell it to run when it loads or when it doesn't. Now, there are cases for both. If you know the search you want to run, I would probably just tell it to run when it loads, okay? Because you're not going to make them click a button to run it. But what if you wanted to do other things, such as be able to specify searching by certain fields? So I could say, okay, now let's search the invoices. Let's do AP invoices record type. Now I'm going to tell it to search where invoice number equals, I don't have a field on the screen yet, but I don't know if I should have put that on there. Let's do this. Let's say invoices, invoice number. I'm going to give them a search form. I'm going to build a little search form here. So then I'm going to tell it, okay, when you do your search, use the invoice number here for that field. I'll send that into the search. So when I actually have a value there, it's going to run with that value as the invoice number. So now if I turn off the run when loads, okay, so now it's going to wait for me to hit a search button or something to trigger it. I could put that up here, but I'm going to repurpose this a little bit in a second. So let me just put a button in the middle. Okay, search. I'll even use a search icon, make it look cool. And let's do the button background color of green. There we go. And I like it a little bit larger. That's kind of small. No, it's kind of big. There you go. How's that? Round the corners a little bit, make it look kind of nice. Now, when that button click happens, I want it to trigger a search field. That one. Now we reload. Just hit search. I didn't type in an invoice number, so it didn't filter it by invoice number. Now, if I typed in, let's just pick on 1027, and hit search. There you go. So now you can make your own little search form if you want to. Now, what I'd probably do to make this a little bit cleaner, I would probably put this up here, put the search button next to that, and then I would pad this just a little bit. There you go. So what we're trying to do is keep everything tied together so you don't have to do so much work. You can just tell it, okay, have this trigger a search, have this do that. One thing you'll notice, if you notice me clicking around, some of you might have picked up on it. Now notice when I click here, I've got this rubber band, this selection icon, this yellow border saying this is the field I've selected, so it shows up over here. But watch what happens when I click the button field. I get the same border here, but I also get a small reddish purple border around this field. And that's because that's telling you this field is set to trigger this one when it's clicked. So it's just a little visual helper that anytime you click on something and it's got a triggering, either the field action or the search field, it's going to try to tell you which one it's going to act on. When you get multiple in the same form, it becomes very nice because it's easy to get lost on which one's going to do what. All right. Now the document viewer stuff. Now, internal document viewers, you can just tell it to open up a category, subcategory, name, whatever, in the record you're in. Okay, so it gets a little trickier to use, but this is mostly meant for showing documents in the record that the Eforms loaded into. I'm not going to go into all the interesting ways you can use this, but just know that when you're using internal stuff and you want to show documents, you would just use this viewer control. And this has been there for a while too. I guess this is not super new. You can tell it the record ID and the document ID down here if you want to. So let's say, for instance, you wanted to put in a help document for somebody. You might put this maybe in a pop-up window and give them a help option up here. Maybe put it on the right. Help, or actually, let's do this. Let's not even put a text. Let's just do a help icon. There you go. Okay. And you could tell this help icon to actually set a modal, tell a modal window to pop up when they can have this document. Now you can actually tell it, load up document number 1, 2, 3, and that could just be a pointer to the document PDF of your help file. So you can give them instructions right in the system. This could be in a, like I said, I'll just kind of mock it up here. You put a modal window in here like this, tell this help option to open in the modal window. Then there's our help documentation. And I probably in that case would set the display of the modal to be full screen or maybe extra large. So it takes up the whole screen size. Otherwise, like I said, if you use these up here, these will act together. So you could say, go to record ID 1, 2, 3 and find the first document in the this category or invoice category. And it'll show that. So that's how you can do searching, some simple document viewing. Data charting, very much, it's really set up almost exactly like the search results. You tell it what search to use, but it's only going to give you the search IDs for the ones that have been charted. So you have to have a chart search ID. Let's run that, open this test. So there's your chart. So once again, if you're building a dashboard, you would probably preset all your saved searches, make sure you got the right saved charts and all that, and then just use those in your Eforms. And as the data changes, so will the chart. But you configure it almost identically to the search results. So you could put them both, both on the screen at the same time, picking the same search. Okay, 8343 on both. Tell it to run when it loads. And this should look just like our search results do. Okay. And don't forget, you can put these in panels and make them scrollable, things like that. So like in the container field, you could put a max height. So let's do like 500 pixels. Drop this in here. Actually, I might even be able to do it on this one. I think about it. I have to play with that a little bit. But it allows you to have, you can scroll the bottom, leave the top alone. So even better than our search results. Now, on the public side of things, it's a little different world because what you're really doing for public searching is you're allowing people in who aren't authenticated. So you can't just say run search ID 1, 2, 3 because they probably wouldn't have any rights to it. So what you need to do for this is first thing you need to do is identify a public record type. So we have some over here. This one's applications. You can notice those little icons. This anything with a door on it is public. So personnel. Let's do, well, this was perfect, public access records. We'll use that one. So let me go back. All right, so we will put in public search results. And I tell it to use public access types, public access records. Now here, I have to tell it what fields to show. So what I'm going to say is I'm not going to do any searching yet. I'm just going to say for the results, I want to show the name, the position, and elected. So apparently this is like a board of directors type of field. And you can tell it what data type, which might help on sorting and things like that. So this might be a date. If I remember right, the elected is an elected date. And I'm not telling it to filter at all. So I'm just saying, just show me everything. Okay, so let me save that. Pop it open. Oh, did I tell it to run? I probably didn't tell it to run when it runs. Run when the form loads. Okay. Now let's do it. Okay, no records available. Now the reason behind that is I'm not a public person. So let me see, or wait a minute. Let me check and make sure I have data in there. Public access records, right? Yeah. Yep, okay. So in order to really test it, we actually lock it down to public for a reason. So if I go to, oh, there it is right there, public eForm, I have to set the form to public as well. And this is all documented, and I'll show you some articles here in a little bit. You have to have a public record type, and you need to make sure that that form is public as well. You save that, copy the URL, and I'll just to make sure, I'll go to a private window. This is a person who's not logged in. I still have a save button, which makes no sense. I would probably go to the form, and I would turn off. Actually, I would probably just turn off all the buttons, top and bottom. There we go, and that goes away. Now at this point, they can't do much with it other than view it. There's no clicking on it. But you've got a search results. Now you can do the same thing we did with the searching before, where I can actually go to, just to make it simpler, I'll make a real quick search form. And then I will say, actually, let's turn off search when loads. We will put a button on here, do the search, and I will have it trigger that public search form. There we go. Okay, and then now what I have to do, similar to the other one, I have to map those buttons. So when I go into the map fields, now I can say, okay, map name equal to a search field. I'll go to the auth fields later, use the name field. And I'll do position and elected, position and elected. Now, right now, what we have is the elected is going to be an exact search. Even though it's a date field, it's going to be an exact search because we're just telling it to use one field. What I would probably do in practice is I would do another field called elected to, and maybe put them side by side. And then over here in my map fields, I can add over there from elected to elected to. Now I do my search. Don't filter it, no big deal. I look at position. Now I'd probably make this a drop down, of course. But treasurer search. There we go. Now, the other thing to think about, and I'm just going to throw this out there as a tip, in your record types under your public access, I might have already done this, but let me go show you here. Under public access records, anything that you're going to let the public search on, you should probably make wildcard accessible. So like on the name, under advanced, yep, I already did it. Turn on the starts with and ends with searches, so they don't have to be exact. If you don't have that on, then they exactly have to type the full position or name to make it work. Now, in this case, I'd probably change that to a drop-down position. But you notice the name is already set to do a begins with and ends with search. So I could just go back here just to make sure I found one. Anderson. I'll just type in A-N-D-E-R. There you go. So it allows you to do wildcards. All right. Let's get out of here, go back to our form. There we go. So you've now effectively made, if I can get back there, a public portal, public searching portal. Now, we have one already built into the system. You could just turn it on for a record type, that kind of thing. But if you wanted to make your own, you can, because you can do more with it. So now it's extended just a little bit, and we're actually moving into our example phase here. Let's go ahead and add a pop-up window for a viewer. Or actually, let's just add a viewer first, then we'll make it pop up to make it look prettier. So now I got to use a public document viewer. Now there is an internal and a public version of each. Make sure you're using the right one, because they do have different security on them. So it's very important to use the correct one. Okay. So now, when I do click this, all you really have to do is link it to the document viewer. Okay, so when I click a record, it's going to show here. Now, this is not going to be the best UI, but we'll get there. I want to go back over to this one here. There we go. Come in, I do a search. I want to see this one. Click on it, and there's our documents down there. Now, it's showing everything, and it's going to show the picture first, which doesn't look very good. I think I'll probably just show resumes. So let me go back here and say this viewer, just focus on resume. If I'm right, that's going to be the category it's in, but I'm going to validate that real quick. What you're doing is you're just telling it which category to show. Don't show everything, because you've got other things in here you may not want to make visible. Okay, so it's the name, not the category. Glad I looked. So just show the documents with the name resume. Now all gets the resumes. All right, so to make this really flow though, you don't want to have to make them scrolling up and down search results here, whatever. I would put it in pop-up like we talked about earlier. So let's go to our containers, take a modal window, and I'm going to put this in there like that. Now, the change here now is now this viewer is not going to be showing. Okay, so we're going to have to make it show somehow. There's a couple ways we could do it. We could use the multi-action tool, but there's a little bit simpler way of doing it. So if you've already linked the search results to the viewer, so now the search results, notice that little border there. When it's clicked, it's going to activate this control. Now you can tell this control, hey, when I'm activated, I want to do something. Tell the modal window to open. So they'll kind of take care of themselves in a way. There you go. Much better interface. I would probably make that a little wider, extra large. I'll show you the full screen here. This might come in handy for somebody, so let me do that. Okay, notice how it took up the whole screen. But choose your poison. There you go. Extra large and large is typically right for this kind of look, in my opinion. And this is, like I said, this one's documented. You can sit and tweak this all day long. I would probably put the search results in a scrollable window. I would probably make this search screen a little smaller, more concise, tweak the look of the, all that stuff. And I would probably have broken this down to a search option up here, a form option, that kind of thing. I'll leave that to you guys to play with offline. If you have any questions, just let me know. All right. So that's all fun stuff. Now let's talk about the built-in eForms. So if you're building your own portal, undoubtedly you're going to get to a point where you're going to want to ask for information from somebody, but you've kind of changed this form from an eForm to more of just a display screen, a portal, if you will. So what you can do is you can use this eForm field to load other eForms. Okay, so I could say I have one here for barcodes. Okay, so now I'll just save that. Pop it open. See? So what happened is my button bar is still there, my toolbar is there, but now I'm putting this form inside of it just by saying embed a form. Okay. In and of itself, okay. But let's do another one. And this one, I'm going to have it chained. I'll do the vendor add form. Okay, so what I'm going to do, let me save that first. Okay, so now we have the vendor form down here and the barcode form up here. Now what I would normally do now is make options in my toolbar. Okay, barcodes. And I'll put another one in here called vendor, add vendor. And I'll call this print barcodes just for fun. Okay, and we'll even give it a little bit of a look here. There we go. Add a vendor, print barcodes. And now, kind of the trick we used before, I'll throw a hidden field in here. Let's call this action, whatever. Now here, I'm going to say, set the action field to barcodes. I'll do the same thing. Print barcodes, print space barcodes, just so everything is the same. Now for this one, I'll do the action to add vendor. And then I'm sure you're seeing what I'm going with this. I'll tell this one to show when action equals print barcodes. I'll have this one visible when action equals, what do we call it? Add vendor. Okay, print barcodes or add a vendor. Now you can start kind of seeing how you can piece it all together. You can build your forms. The beautiful way about this is you don't have to have one form that does it all. And that's kind of where we started with the system where, okay, I can hide and show panels, and but I got to put all my logic in this one humongous eForm so I can have all my 10 options available there. Well, now you can build specialized eForms that are outside of that, you kind of can make containers, if you will. And the menu form, this form becomes really simple. Just got to know when to hide and show the right ones. Okay. Now, the other thing we could do is even simplify this more. We start over a little bit here, kind of do something similar. What I'm going to do is instead of picking the form to show, I can say go custom. And what it's going to do is look for an eForm ID to load. So let's duplicate this. The reason I'm doing that is so I can get some eForm IDs. I don't know them off the top of my head. Okay, so its barcodes is 138. So in this case, 138. So the print barcodes, I'm going to say 138 in the action. The vendor is 142. So I'm going to tell it to set 142 in the action. I'm going to tell this to be visible when action is not empty. Not empty. There we go. So if the action field is not empty, show it. In other words, if you haven't picked a form yet, don't show it. So now all I'm doing is taking one form. I have to go in here and tell it what field to use. Action field. Right? So I had to put that value from the action into that. So we get the same end result, but your initial form is even has less, I wouldn't say simpler, but it has less form, less fields on it, less clutter. So now you can just kind of flavor this one up, put some borders on it, whatever you want to do, and it'll work for everything. So that's a pretty good example, use case for this toolbar. I'm going to try to at least start building a secure portal. Now this one gets a little interesting. I'm going to do a new form. I'm going to call this, just so I have it isolated, Boot Camp vendor portal. Okay, so here's the trick with the vendor portal. If you want to have somebody log in from an outside, and when we say a portal, we're really talking about them having to authenticate to get in here. So far we built a public form that anybody can use. They don't have to log in. In this case, we're going to build a public form that you have to log in to use. Okay, so what we can do is we identify the record type. Let me go back here. Look at our record types that has the vendor information in. So in this case, we have an AP vendors record type. Okay, so we have our own information, our name, address, whatever. If we want to build a way for that vendor to log in to see their own stuff, we can essentially link to that record type using this system. So what we can do is under the security options of the main portal form, let me just say, I'm going to name this so we know what we're doing, vendor portal. Okay. Under the main options, you can say, oh, first I got to set it to public. There we go. Make sure it's public. Always got to remember that. And I can tell it to use a simple password where they can say, just put in ABC and they can log in, but that doesn't really get you anywhere. I want to actually do a lookup. So I can say advanced password check to tell it to check the AP vendor's record type. I'll get into this here in a second, where the GUID matches and your password matches. So what we do is, when this form loads up to an external user, it's going to bring them to a login screen and say, enter your password. What it does is take the password they entered and the GUID that actually got sent out with the form, which I'll show you in a second, takes the combination of those two and does a lookup in this vendor's record type, right, to find a match. If it finds a match with that GUID and the password that matches, then we basically bring this form up inside that record, as if you're an internal user who opened this eForm inside the vendor record. So now we know which record they're in, so we can do some work with it. So just because we're running short on time, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to show the name and address here. Okay. Sorry, I should have said this before, but the only way this works is if you have the record type for AP vendor set to collaboration. Got to turn on the collaboration setting under public. Okay. If you're using public access searching for outside users not authenticated, you turn on this switch. If you're doing it for vendors or somebody to log into, you got to turn on this switch. We don't care about the portals, any of this stuff. That's for our old school, the old portal system. All we need to have is this flag's got to be turned on so we can collaborate with them, if you want to think of it that way. Once that's turned on, then that record type becomes accessible through these portals. Okay. Let me go back in here. And if you noticed under security, it only showed a few record types. It only shows the one where that collaboration flag is turned on. That's why it was there. Okay. So now to go back to the actual vendor, let's pick on one Copyworks here. Okay. I can see it here, but I'm going to go in and show you. If I edit this record, we have a field called GUID that has this ugly thing in it and a password, which is really the last section of the GUID. In order for them to authenticate in, we need to have some way to identify who they are. Okay, and we do that by sending out to them a link that has their GUID in it. Now, the GUID is not a magic thing. You don't have to have a field named GUID. There just has to be some unique identifier about that record that allows us to know which record they're trying to authenticate into. So that when they enter their password, we can say, okay, and the passwords match, come on in. We use GUID and password because it's kind of an industry standard terminology. Let's say you already have a unique identifier like this one up here, a vendor ID. You could just as easily use that instead of the GUID. You would just tell our system that use the ID. And then when you send the link out to them, save that, you would actually put that ID on there. So to show you what I mean by that is if I copy the public form URL, go to that private window, paste it in there, I would have to do this. ID equals, what was that ID? 2223. Oh, there. I would send them this link. So in a workflow automation or something like that, you would send them this link either by an SMS text or through email. What we're doing is we're just saying, okay, this link gets you into this record, but you still have to know your password. Hit enter, it comes up, says, what's your password? Now, if I go back here, this is the password. Put that in there, log it in, I got in. If it didn't match, it wouldn't let me in. But notice it's also giving me some information that came directly out of this record. And that's because in the eForm, I dropped the name and address in there, and those are the fields that came from that record that they logged into and they saw. So we just, with those few steps, we actually linked that external form to an internal record. Now what we do with it is completely up to us. We could give them another form inside of here that allows them to maintain their name and address so they can change it themselves. So this has a save button. If I change this to 100 to 1000 and hit save, right? Come back here and look at that record, refresh. Look at that, it updated. They had rights to it, so they changed it. Now you'd probably go through some other process maybe, but who knows, depends on the situation. But just to know that once you get logged in, you're now talking directly to that record they authenticated to. Now I know we're like 1 minute over, but I'm just gonna take you to the next phase. What I would do then probably is give them a way to search their invoices. So you do a public search, because they're, even though they're quote unquote authenticated, they're still not really an internal user. So you have to use the public search results here. Okay. And you could tell them to search their invoices, and then that's where you'd start mapping your fields. Now in this case, I would say vendor ID is an auth field. In other words, that's one of those authentication fields. And what that means is it's a field from here, which is the ID. So I think it's just called ID. Yeah, ID. So I would put that in here, take the ID of the record you authenticated with and put that into the vendor field so that they can only see their own records. And then of course you'd map your results in here, your invoice number, maybe your date, amount. And without doing any testing, I'm not even sure. Oh, and I probably didn't tell it to run. Apologize for being a little over time on this one, guys. There you go. So those are the invoices for this vendor. And then you'd link it to probably a document viewer that would pop up and just show them the invoice. But there's other things, and I'll just show you this real quick before we drop off. The other thing that's really fun about this, when you map your result fields, there's another field type on the external form. We haven't put this on the internal search results, but it's on external. There's a button. And you can actually tell it to set values. What I use this for is giving them a button that says, I want to dispute this invoice, or I want to, have a question about this invoice. You can pop up a form that allows them to put information about the specific invoice that they just were looking at. So it actually shows up on the results. I do like a red, something like that. There you go. Doesn't do anything yet. We haven't mapped it to anything, but you get the idea.